guest speaker for the session for today, Nigel Green. Most of us have heard you yesterday, but the real thing is only going to be in today. Was currently a physical education, a physical literacy consultant, having been a senior lecturer in physical education at the Liverpool John Moores University from 2009 to 18. He has taught physical education in 4 secondary schools for 29 years prior to this. During his time, he has led 3 departments, that is physical education, art, music, dance and drama, and a networked community. He is involved in training teachers and providing professional development for over 30 years in UK and more recently in India, Brazil, Taiwan. As a previous member of the Physical Education Association, UK Executive Committee, a current member of the Northwestern Counties Physical Education Association, Executive Committee, and Chair of the International Physical Literacy Association, Nigel demonstrates a commitment and passion to promote and support the development of physical education and physical literacy worldwide. He has written a number of articles. He is also specialized in pedagogy and in ICT. On behalf of the Ministry of Youth Affairs and Sports, Government of India, Halo India, lectured by National College of Physical Education, a warm welcome to you, the most awaited speaker of today, Mr. Nigel Green. Welcome you to the session.
Thank you. Namaste,
Namaste.
It's nice to be back with you after the experience yesterday.
Could I just take a minute to welcome others? Just a second.
Yes. Sorry. Yep.
I also would like to welcome Dr. Rosa, Dr. Darling Kluka, Dr. Amit Malik, Dr. G. Kishore, Dr. Sanjeev Patel, and my dear PE teachers from across the country. A warm welcome to one and all. Over to you, Nigel Green, for your presentation.
Okay, I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, hopefully you can all see that.
Yes, we could see it.
That's good. So as Usha says, my main experience is that of a PE teacher, and I think that's really important when talking to PE teachers, to have people who've worked at the coalface, so to speak. So 29 years working with children in schools, which I thoroughly enjoyed. I learned a lot about. I then went on to teacher training college at university to train teachers and continue to promote physical education and more recently physical literacy. I was very fortunate to be invited to India 4 years ago by the Gopichan, which is now the Elms Group, and have since worked with 3 schools in the Gurgaon and Delhi area, the heritage schools, as well as having some experience of working in government schools as well. And this opportunity has allowed me to understand the Indian physical education system to a certain extent. Obviously, my experience is limited to the schools I've been in, but I've talked to many teachers and university lecturers within India, both formally at conferences and informally. And I've got, I think, quite a good understanding of where the system is at. And as I was talking to Usha earlier, we feel there is a need for change. And I'm aware that you're interested in assessment in PE. So today I'm going to look at assessment or charting progress. But as you would have heard yesterday, physical literacy is a key concept that we believe physical education teachers should understand. If they understand physical literacy, then this will help them in their teaching of physical education. And therefore, an assessment of physical education is also assessment of physical literacy. And we'll see that as we progress. So first of all, what I'd like you to do is think about what you see here. I'm not going to ask you to put your hands up as I would normally do, and to come out with your suggestions. But as with most things, we make a judgment on something that we see based on our previous experiences. And this is where it's very similar to physical literacy. Our previous experiences in physical activities influence whether we decide to participate in them in the future or what we get out of them, whether we enjoy them or not. So if you've had a range of experiences in physical education, you will have more opportunities to make progress, and you will be judging something from a wider, broader viewpoint. If your experiences are quite narrow, then obviously your judgments will be from a limited viewpoint. So as you look at this picture, some of you may have seen it before. Therefore, you may know what it is I'm able to tell you is in that picture. Others may not. And you may see one image, whilst others of you may see two images. I can safely tell you that the first image is one of an old lady, and you will see her nose, her chin, her eyes, and then her head with her fur coat on. But the other image is one of a young lady, and here you will see her eyes and nose and cheek and chin and neck, and she's looking away, and this is her hair with a nice hat and flowing hood. So what's important is how we actually see something based on our judgments. And what we increasingly understand is that physical education is actually a very complex phenomenon, just as physical literacy is. Therefore, what we need to know is, what are we looking for? What do we understand physical education to be? And as you will see from the text on the screen, generally across the world, physical education is assumed to be education in movement, physical activity and sport, to ensure or encourage that young people maximize their potential by having a range of experiences in different activities. It's also education about movement, about the actual physical activities and sports themselves from a scientific, technical, knowledge and understanding point of view. But it's also education through movement, where we nurture individuals' confidence, social skills, well-being and attitudes. And again, across the world, you will find that people will see physical education as a real key to the promotion and the development of a lifelong involvement in physical activity and sport. But what you must remember is that your experiences of PE influence what you believe PE to be. So if you have your experiences, you go to teacher training college and your experiences are similar, you then go into school and the school teaches in PE in a similar way, then that will be your philosophy, your understanding. However, we need to consider alternative ways of looking at physical education and what actually physical education has been, how it has changed, and how it could be, because that will affect how we see PE to be important. Historically, back in the early 1900s in the UK, PE was drill, and it was based on making people fit, keeping good order, doing as they're told, and very simple army militaristic exercises. This continued for a while, and you will still see in many schools across the world a very formal militaristic lining up, keeping everyone in order. And we do have to do that to a certain extent for safety. But things have changed. In the early 1940s, 50s, we started thinking more about the holistic development of the child through physical education. So it wasn't just the physical skills, it was the emotional development, it was the knowledge and understanding and the social development. So we understood that physical education had far more to offer. Currently, in India, like in many countries across the world, their physical education curriculum is based on many traditional and cultural activities. And that's absolutely fine, because those are the sort of activities that individuals will be involved with. There's always a significant focus on health and fitness. And again, that's very important. We know how important health and fitness is to individuals throughout their lives. And we know the issues in relation to heart disease, obesity, cancer, and so on, that inactivity is currently causing. We've also had, in many countries across the world, a significant focus on school teams and success in medals and competitions. And this is possibly where we have some issues. Because if we're focusing on a few people and making sure the school is successful in a few sports, then yes, we might have medals and trophies on the table, and we might have positively impacted on a small number of people, but we could well have switched off a significant portion of the population. And as PE teachers, our responsibility is to provide everyone in our class with a physical education throughout their time in school. As physical education practitioners, then, our philosophy, what we believe is right, what we believe physical education to be, will then influence what we offer, the curriculum and the experiences, how we do that with the pedagogical approaches, and how we actually assess that or chart it through assessment, charting progress. So there's a clear link from our philosophy to what we actually end up doing. And this is important. Increasingly, again, in the current climate, we are accountable. Every school is accountable to governing bodies and then local authorities and states and governments. And this accountability has increased over periods of time. The part of the problem with that, however, is that we've tried to come up with systems that have been good to measure accountability, but actually haven't been particularly good for teachers, parents to understand, and don't really reflect on the progress we're looking for. So what I'm suggesting is that we should start to look at what is important in physical education. A little note in relation to that, in the UK, if you're keeping up with the current developments, we've just released our exam results. And because of COVID, the government was supposed to come up with a system that allowed a fair response to the exam results based on teacher suggested grades and government algorithms. It's been chaotic, and what's happened, the government has done a U-turn and they finally agreed to give grades out based on teacher suggestions, which is the students are happier about. To me, this highlights the challenges of a system that we currently have. Because as the little quotes on here say, if we're trying to assess, not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts. And also, if we're giving grades out, it could be argued that a grade is an inadequate report of a precise judgment of a biased and variable judge of the extent to which a student has attained an undefined level of mastery of an unknown proportion of an indefinite amount of material. I know that's a bit of a mouthful, but essentially what it's saying is, are grades actually important? Or is there something that's more important when we're reflecting on progress? One thing to consider is that physical education is multidimensional, just as physical literacy is. We have the cognitive aspect, we have the affective aspect, and the physical components. And this makes it a real challenge when we're trying to measure progress, particularly if we want to use a tool that has been designed for that purpose. And at this stage, I will indicate that hundreds of different tools are available and can be used. Many tools have numerous items that a teacher needs to assess on, which take a tremendous amount of time and need good knowledge. But actually, what we were looking for is something that is far more simple, something that can measure the motivation, the confidence, the physical competence, the knowledge and understanding of individuals. This leads me nicely on to physical literacy. And obviously, some of you were on the webinar yesterday when Margaret was explaining about the concept, and you heard Gopi-chan and Amit Malik earlier on last week explaining about physical literacy. Just to reiterate, we'll just go back. Physical literacy is the motivation, confidence, competence, knowledge and understanding to value and engage in physical activity for life. And if we are therefore looking at an approach that focuses on physical literacy, then the individual must be the heart of everything we do. We must promote and then reflect on motivation. We must promote and encourage confidence and reflect on that. Develop competence and reflect on that. Increase knowledge and understanding and reflect on that. And as we're doing this, as part of our charting of progress, as part of our assessment, as part of our development through physical education, we're looking to devolve that responsibility to the children so they become more reflective, more critical individuals. We also want to be able to record these. If we look at physical literacy, then we are trying, I would argue, as physical education teachers, to develop the attributes you can see on the screen. And if you think of one of your students leaving school at the end of this year, and if you ask those questions of those students, are you someone who wants to be physically active? Does that student want to be physically active on a regular basis? Are they confident in a range of physical activities? Can they move efficiently and effectively in a variety of activities? Do they know how to improve not only their own performance, but the performance of others? And can they work either independently or with others, in pairs, in groups, in teams? Are they aware of the impact and importance of physical activity on their personal well-being? And are they aware of the range of movement capabilities and possibilities from different activities? And finally, do they have the self-confidence to engage in physical activity for life? And if you think of your students, how many of them are leaving your school with all those attributes in a positive manner? And that's a question as a PE teacher you've got to ask yourself, because essentially that is an assessment of your teaching, of your influence on those children. So using those statements is quite nice from a reflection from a teacher's point of view. So what we need to decide in the first place, however, is where the learners are going, what you want them to do. And I've just given you an example here of the attributes we're looking for. So what in your planning are the targets? What do each one of those learners need or want to do to help them move forwards? Where are they now? Because as you pick up that class at the start of the year or the start of the semester, how do you know where each one of those 30 or 40 or 50 children are in relation to their development from a physical point of view, from a cognitive point of view, from an effective point of view? What is their start point? And I would argue that each one of the children in your class is probably at a different start point, because they've all had different previous experiences. Let's say, for example, you've picked up a class and the activity you're going to teach that class for the next number of weeks is basketball, and it's a grade 9 class. Some of those children might not have played basketball at all before. They might have had some games experience, but not basketball specifically. So they might not be motivated to take part in that activity, or they may be because they haven't experienced it. Others in that class may have been taught basketball before, so they might have an idea how the game works. And even more in those class might have joined a basketball team and gone to summer camps. And so they could be good basketball players and have a good knowledge and understanding and be very confident. But you don't know that at the start. You don't know where they're at. So as a teacher, you've got to find out where they're at. You've then, as it says in point 3, you've got to find a way of closing the gap with where they're starting from to where you want to help them get to move them forwards. And what I'm going to suggest to you now is a system whereby you can observe where the children are at. You can plan your material to work with the children, and you can record where the children are at from an assessment chart in progress point of view. So the first thing I'm going to suggest is the use of an authentic core task. I mentioned to you a few minutes ago about a group of who you're going to take a grade 9 for basketball. So let me give you a different class. A group of grade 6 students who you've got for gymnastics. You've never taught them before. They've just come to be in your year group. So you've got this class of 30 children. How do you know what they can do? Well, if you give them an authentic, so that's a realistic core task to start off with, then that will allow you to observe them in action. It will allow you as the teacher to reflect on what their level of competence is physically, what their confidence is to get involved and to work with others, what their motivation is to want to do things and to want to improve, and also what their knowledge and understanding is, what they know and understand from possibly some of the terms or the instructions that you give them. So the class of 30, you give them a task, and your first task is to demonstrate individuals' roles, traveling, flight, and balances on floor and apparatus. So that is the first task. And you can watch the children demonstrating perhaps forward rolls, perhaps handstands and cartwheels, perhaps running and jumping and landing. And you can observe their competence, their confidence, their knowledge and understanding, their motivation. You can then change the task so they work with a partner. They ask them to create a sequence with that partner. So you're then looking at their creativity, their ability to work with someone else, to communicate, to create balances, to work in symmetry with each other, and so on. You can then ask them to reflect on the strengths and weaknesses. So you're asking them to communicate ideas and thoughts to you. That then gives you a good idea of where the individuals within that class are from a starting point. And I've given you an example there of football, and we've got examples of all different sports that you can use. The more complicated aspect now, hopefully many of you will have downloaded the scheme that was put on the website. Now, this is a table tennis scheme, and I totally understand that many of you may not have access to table tennis tables, but this is just an example to show you of how you can plan your scheme and use it to assess the children. So you might want to upload that. I'm going to upload it in a moment and explain to you where the core tasks come in, how we look at learning outcomes, success criteria, and then planning, which links in to a form of assessment. So just bear with me while I just bring this up. Okay, so this is the scheme plan for table tennis. These are the core tasks you can see. So if you've got a, yes, Usha?
Did you open up the link hasn't opened? Are you opening up the link?
It has on my screen.
Your link is, you're given a link. The link is yet to open, I think. If you do you want to share that?
It does say it's sharing.
It's sharing, but it's just keeping the scheme shared, like quotas, learning objectives, success criteria, session plans. But are you opening any link?
You might need to bear with me then, because
Can we open it for you if you've given us?
Let me see. I'd have to go out of it. Let me just.
Can I ask Hari to share it? Okay, you could do that.
Can you do that?
One I will do.
Hari?
Yes, madam. I am sharing.
Yeah, can you just take up this particular thing, heritage school schemes?
Yeah, do you want me to stop sharing?
Yes, sir. Right,
Yeah,
sir.
okay.
Please stop. Websites.
While this is coming up, hopefully you will have been able to open this up from the link on the website. If not, as you can see, it's moving towards it.
Which one do you want?
The table tennis
Table
Excel.
tennis. Hari, can you see
Yep.
down below? Yeah.
That's it.
Nigel, I have got that also handy with me when I can share.
So I think it'll be coming up now, Amit. Thanks for that.
Is this one?
Okay,
Okay.
yeah, that's absolutely fine. I might just need you to scroll down, but not just yet. What you'll see here, just for me to explain it, is there are a series of core tasks that start from beginner, go to the development, intermediate, and advanced. So that if you've got a group of beginners who've not done an activity before, you could give them that core task. And as you can see, for a beginner, it's creating a game, and then it's demonstrating how to start with different shots, and then suggesting your strengths and areas to develop. If these students have had table tennis last year, for example, and this is the second time they're moving on to the subject, you might give them the developmental level task. But it might be that in that time, some of your students have been going to a table tennis club and they've improved tremendously. So you could give some of the students the advanced task in your class. And all of a sudden, we've got a different situation here where you're thinking about where your students are at the start of your unit of work and what I then need to do as a teacher. So if we go then down slightly and across to the left, you will see that for every lesson, there are physical, affective, and cognitive learning outcomes. So as a teacher, you're thinking about the development of your children from a physical, from an affective, and from a cognitive point of view. That will then be reflected on at the end of the lesson by the success criteria. And you can do that for each one of the levels of ability for the children in your class. So for example, let's say you were doing table tennis. It's the second time you've had this group. So most of the children are working at the development level. But some of the children have found it very difficult. So you can give those the beginner level material. A number of the children are actually doing really well. And so you could give those the intermediate level of the material. And as a teacher, from an assessment point of view, all you need to write down are the names of the children in that box, whether it's beginner, developmental, or intermediate, and that indicates the level that they're at. So that is a form of assessment. But this assessment is also your plan. So your plan will develop throughout the weeks. If you can just scroll down, please. Just scroll down just slowly, yeah. So each week there are different learning outcomes. Just keep going, that's absolutely fine. There are different areas that you focus on. If you just scroll down just nice and slowly, that would be great. And there would be different tasks that the children can do, different pedagogical approaches that the teacher can use are all within this scheme. And then the teacher can use this as a form of record based on where the children are in relation to their learning. That record can then be used or passed on to the next teacher who takes them. and it might be when they do table tennis the following year, or whatever activity it is. So the teacher has a record that goes with the class throughout their school education. And we've got schemes like this for table tennis, for football, for cricket, for badminton, all the different normal activities. And so it's quite a nice way of having a clear focus for the teacher in regards to what you're teaching, but also it allows you to record where the children are from an assessment point of view. Okay, if I can go back to, I'll just go back to sharing the screen again. There. Okay. Another way to look at charting progress very simply is the sheet you see in front of you. Because again, you are PE teachers, you have a limited amount of time. Therefore, if you're able to make observations very swiftly, this will be helpful. If you are able to involve the children in those observations, then that will be even more helpful, because you're helping them to develop a knowledge and understanding and to be critically reflective. As Margaret indicated yesterday, physical literacy is our disposition. It's our attitude about what we want to do. And it relates to our motivation, confidence, competence, knowledge and understanding. So a simple sheet here would be for table tennis. So you can see the picture there. A child's name could be on here. And all the child would do at the start of the activity is put a little tick or a cross to say how motivated they were, how confident they felt, how competent they felt, their knowledge and understanding on this little slider scale. Once they'd done their 10, 12 lessons, depending on how many you do, the children could then put another mark on there to indicate where they were. And what you'd look to see is, had there been any progress from one point to another. Again, this sheet could be kept with the child. They could have one for each activity. This sheet would then go on to the next time they did table tennis, and they could reflect on their progress. So if it was a grade 6, they could put a tick with G6, and then a tick with G7, G8, and so on. And then that way you're monitoring the child's interpretation of how they feel they're making progress. As a teacher, you can then look at that, and if one of them is down here, for example, and they're not very motivated, that gives you an opportunity to talk to that child and ask them why. And they might say, well, it's not challenging me, it's too easy. I'm very good, but I'm bored because you're not making it more challenging for me. Or I don't know what I'm doing. I really don't understand the game. That's why I'm not very motivated or confident. So a simple chart like this allows a reflection by the teacher and the pupil. And that's really important, to have that shared dialogue. So just going to go through a few points first that relate back to the physical literacy before I move on to look at a few more examples. First of all, from a physical literacy point of view, we suggest that any judgment should be based on the effective physical and cognitive development. So we want to know how they've improved their physical competence, how their confidence and motivation has improved, and how their knowledge and understanding has improved. And all of those are important. It's not just the physical skills that we're looking at in isolation. We're looking at the holistic development of the child. It's not just doing a written test on how many people there are in a hockey team and what's the rule for this, that, or the other. It's their holistic development. So judgment should be holistic. The second point, any judgment should be criteria referenced. And if you saw in the scheme, it went from beginner to developer to intermediate to advanced. So there are criteria that they're working on to move forwards, and you'll see criteria in a minute. What we're looking at is progress. Just as in this last one, we want to see progress from one point to another. There is absolutely no point in having reference from one individual to another, to compare one against the other. Because I could have lots of experience playing table tennis, and if you're comparing me to my peer in the class who's hardly played, what is the point of comparing us? What we need to look at is my progress in those table tennis lessons and my peers' progress in those lessons, because that's what's important, the progress being made. The judgments we're looking at should then reveal how we're progressing and guide us to the future. So with the scheme that I showed you earlier, once you've done one lesson, it'll take you on to the next lesson and show you what you need to do next to improve. So we're looking for that progressive development. As I suggested in the last slide, we need to involve the teacher and the student, and if possible the parent as well, because it's really key for the parents to understand how their son or daughter is improving. And if we can record it, and the two I've shown you are ways of recording. I'm now going to show you some others. Just a quick drink of water. At the heritage schools in Gurgaon and Delhi areas that I've been working with, we developed quite a simple system. It has 10 levels, so it is progressive and it's developmental. And again, you should have access to this. And we're reflecting on the physical, the affective and cognitive development. And we're reflecting in relation to specific statements. So if your child is doing a football lesson, for example, and a football unit of work, at the end and at the start, they can reflect on where they are. They believe they're at this level here. They could put a little grade 7 football, and you can see the codes at the bottom, G7F here, G7F there. From the health and fitness, from a personal, they might put a little comment there, from a social here, from a cognitive and a creative. And this gives us then a little graph to show where they are at the start of a unit of work. At the end of the unit of work, the students can then reflect again on the same criteria to see whether they've made progress. They might have moved up a whole level. They might have gone from the bottom of this one further up. They might be more competent or feel more competent. This can be a sheet that goes all the way through to grade 12 from grade 1. Because if you look at the statements at the top of the matrix, we can see these are characteristics that we'd love to see from every student leaving physical education within a school. So students can use this, teachers can use this and work with the students on this, and parents can be shown this or can have copies of this. We can record all the types of activities just using a simple scale, as you can see on the bottom of this sheet, and this can be done on one sheet of paper. So again, it is a very, very simple form of charting progress, but it is holistic because it's looking at the physical, affective, and cognitive. The final one I want you to consider is one we've developed at the IPLA, and again, you'll have access to this from the link and on the website, but I won't go on to that. I'll stay with this view, and I know the writing on it is quite small, but this works in a similar way. We're reflecting on motivation, confidence, physical competence, knowledge and understanding. So we're making 12 comments. Each one of these domains, we're splitting into 3 different areas. And there are then graded statements in relation to how an individual is developing. We recognize that some of your children will be unaware or have very little engagement in the early stages, or competence, knowledge, understanding, or confidence. So that is our start point. As children get more confident, more competent, and so on, they may be in this area. As they develop, consolidate, and maximize, they will grow. So again, this is a chart that could follow the children throughout their school career as they engage in physical education. You could use a simple scale. You could put in pictures or link pictures to it. You could link videos to it. You could link written text to it. So this document could be used to chart progress and provide a holistic reflection of the development and the progress that an individual is making. In summation then, our assessment is very much based on our philosophy. What we want to assess, we will assess. What we want to teach, we will assess. So my argument to you is that check your philosophy first. Make sure all your teachers within the school, your school principals and senior officers are comfortable with your focus. Then plan your work, plan your strategies, your content, your experiences, but also then assess in relation to that philosophy, and try and make sure that philosophy is holistic. Create a simple system. Teachers do not want to spend hours testing. I am aware, and I'll probably be a bit controversial here, that in India there is a suggestion that you want to fitness test everyone. I would argue that fitness testing is a waste of time if it's done once a year. It serves no purpose. It just provides statistics. Is that what you want from your physical education? Some statistics? If it is, then do it. But I would argue, and there are lots of other arguments perhaps for another day, about the validity of fitness testing of children. But parents, children and teachers want a simple system. So you need to have a simple system. You need to have criteria that children understand. You need to have criteria that parents and teachers also understand. And that system needs to reflect on where you start, how you make progress, and where you'd like to move and develop in relation to your physical, affective, and cognitive capabilities in the future. The final point there is we want to gradually devolve the ownership of this process to the children. So the teacher in the early years will be very much leading that process, but gradually the teacher will share increasingly with the children and the parents. And then essentially, as the children progress through school and become more competent and confident in using the system, they then may get that control over the system themselves. Okay, I'm going to leave it there because I'm quite sure there's lots of questions, and I will stop sharing. So hopefully that's given a flavour, and I think I'm going to be open to questions now, Usha.
Yeah, thank you so much. Nigel, I think we didn't want actually the session to end, but it was such a good learning experience for us. And indeed, the first question one of the questions by Akhil Maini, what are the components of quality physical education program? How would you prioritize these components along with giving justification for your choices?
The components, did you say there, of a physical education program?
Quality physical education program.
Yeah, I think as we suggested yesterday, each school is different. And I think I mentioned I went to Nepal and the school had very little in the surrounding area. And I know many schools in India have one teacher, they have very limited facilities. So it's impossible to give a general example because every single school is different. One school might have a rough bit of open land, and another school might have athletics track, swimming pool, badminton courts, and so on. However, based on that, I think it's very important in the early years that the children experience physical activity through play, through body management, gymnastic type dance activities, as well as not athletic as in, your javelin, triple jump and so on, but running, jumping, throwing, catching, games types activities. So they're experienced to a breadth of environments. I think this is the real key. And they develop a range of movement capacities in these range of activities. So breadth is really important in the early years. As the children then develop, you start to introduce more structure and more formality within your approaches. But that doesn't stop creativity. So in gymnastics, I gave the example there of developing sequences. That allows the children to be creative, but the teacher also needs to provide opportunities for them to learn different skills that they can then adapt into the different sequences, to experience different dances, to experience yoga and the different ways of working from that point of view, possibly even martial arts. So a full range of experiences. As the children go through school, then you start to introduce more formal activities, because when we leave school and when we start to get an interest in an activity, we want to play that activity. So I use the example of table tennis, and children in the early years will be throwing balls, will be hitting balls with their hands, with bats of different sizes. And then eventually you might put a little barrier in between. And so you're playing a sort of tennis, and then you put a table there and you're playing a form of table tennis. But this can be very creative early on. But there does come a stage where you will introduce the more formal activity of table tennis, and you'll start to develop the understanding of tactics the reflective nature of observing others and giving feedback, and then the skill development as well associated to it. So it's a progressive, planned, broad, but deep experiences in a range of activities.
Yeah. Another question by Shruti: how physical literacy help us to build healthy society? Because many children, especially girls, involved in very less physical activity. So how could we motivate more girls to get into physical activity? Is the question. Motivating more girls.
Okay, motivating girls, motivating anyone actually is the main focus. It's what we're about. And I would ask every teacher to reflect on the last lesson they taught. Did each one of the children at the end of the lesson have a smile on their face? Did they have a sense of well-being? Did they feel more confident about themselves? Did they have an increased self-esteem? Had they increased their knowledge and understanding? Had they developed? Because if they had, then it's more likely they'll come back again, and they'll come back and want to do things. And if you're able to do that in school, and you're able to engage those children and enthuse those children, then it doesn't matter whether it's a boy or a girl. It doesn't matter whether they're old or young. If you can enthuse them as a teacher, then they will want more. And if they want more, they will go and find it. I'll link that to a question that's come up before about the games and the children on the games. The games that children play on screens are designed to enthuse and encourage. They have little levels of challenge. And once the children reach that challenge, there's another level of challenge and another. And each time they go up, they feel good about themselves and they want to keep going. And it's exactly the same in PE. But we've got to make the environments enjoyable and challenging. And again, I'll give you an example. I've seen children lining up, waiting their turn for 5 minutes, having a go for a couple of seconds, going to the back of the queue. How do they feel at the end of that lesson? Will they want to go to that next level, or have you switched them off? And I would argue in a lot of cases, we've switched too many people off because of our pedagogical strategies and approaches. So girls or boys, it's got to be challenge at the right level, enthuse, encourage, and motivate them.
Yeah. Another question by Wazid Bashir is, since suggesting co-programs, is it helpful in terms of those with injuries and in demanding games, for example, like gymnastics or football? What would be the alternatives in such cases? Co-programs.
I'm sorry, you were just referring to people who are injured.
Injured.
Okay, so if you've got a PE class, that may well include children who are ill or who are injured. They're still part of your class. And I think too often we say, okay, go away or sit at the side. But actually, as a teacher, you're responsible for their learning. So you need to teach in ways that engage those people. So even if I've got a broken arm from playing my sport, I can still stand at the side and I can coach. I can become a mini teacher. If I'm using reciprocal methods, I can be the little mini teacher who is working with a small group of children, and I'm helping them. I'm observing them and giving feedback. I'm refereeing. I'm involved. So anyone who's injured or ill still needs to be part of the lesson.
Another question is, should we allow children who are specializing at badminton players to play involved in other games like football, tennis, Do you think that participating in such games would affect their specialized sport?
Okay, well, great question. And all the research demonstrates that early specialization in a sport is ineffective. Okay, and PE teachers, we need to know this. Coaches, you need to know this. Getting children into one sport and keeping them in one sport is ineffective. Okay, that's the first thing. So we need to have breadth. And I'll give you some examples. Where I worked in schools, Liverpool and Manchester, who have big football clubs, would often take our children at an early age, and they would coach them in football. Many of them would want to be professional footballers, and in India they'd want to be professional cricketers or badminton players. So they would devote lots of time to it. These clubs are quite ruthless, and when they get to a certain age, they just say, thank you very much, goodbye. That child has then lost a tremendous amount of experience in different activities, in different social occasions. They are losing out. So we need to have breadth of experiences for all children. So no to early specialization, yes to wide and quality experiences for everyone.
Thank you. I think there'll been a question on how to prepare the lesson plan, but it may not be possible right now. How to improve self-confidence for students?
Okay, another good question. I don't know how many of you have actually been on a rock climbing wall, an indoor rock climbing wall. And if you can picture an indoor rock climbing wall, the first level is at a nice slope. It's got big holds on. It's got a rope attached to the top, which is attached to you, and somebody else is belaying you up. And if you fall, you're not going to go anywhere. So you'll climb up it, you'll climb down it. You then move on to one that's slightly more sloped, and the holds are slightly smaller. You have a go at that. You then move on to the next level and so on. I think you're getting my drift, because at some stage, there's going to be a climb that goes up, has an overhang that you've got to swing round with tiny holds on. Now, if I'm a child in a class and you give me a challenge that's like that to start off with, my self-confidence will go straight away. If you give me that, I'll say, yes, thank you. I enjoyed that. I feel good about myself. I've learnt a bit about it. Now give me something that's a bit harder, a bit more challenging and a bit more challenging. I also use the example of juggling. If I was to ask every one of you to juggle a ball, one ball at a time, and I left you doing that, you'd be bored. Most of you, as most of your children would. If I then said juggle two balls, again, for most of you, that would be fine. Some of you might find it a little bit of a challenge. Certainly some of your students might. But for most of you, you're still bored. So now I'm going to give you 3 balls to juggle. Now I know that some of you will be able to juggle 3 balls. Most of you won't, but the challenge is there for you to do it. And if you manage it, you're going to feel good. You're going to be confident about yourself. And then you're going to look for the next challenge. But if I took you straight away to juggling with 4 balls, you switch off. And that's where the teacher has got to get the balance of the challenge at the right level for all 30 children in their class. And that is an incredibly difficult job.
Thanks, Nigel. Just a last question, because since we have less of time, you have worked in India, the PE sector, and you talk of the European countries in terms of PE, physical education. So what do you find is something which is required in India so that we could be coming up at the global level? What is your perception? What is that needs to be done here so that we could lift up the PE in India?
Okay, I think there's a number of things. One, there needs to be timetabled time on the curriculum in every school in the country, and the timetable time, ideally, where possible, and I know this isn't possible, ideally is by a qualified PE teacher, ideally. And I know that's not the case. So therefore, we've got to support all the other teachers in the country who are in those one teacher schools, two teacher schools, to help them understand physical education, physical literacy, to help them and support them. So that's the first thing. And then give adequate time. I would argue, and again, it's a bold one, we should be giving children an hour a day of physical education, an hour a day of quality experience, because World Health will tell you, as individuals, we need 60 minutes, as children need 60 minutes a day of physical activity. If they get it nowhere else, they can get that in schools. And I know some schools will say, we can't do that, it'll affect our results. And I will say, sorry, nonsense. The best schools in the world with the best results have the most PE. And I know, because the schools I've worked with in India are among the top in the country, and they have an hour of PE a day for the vast majority of their children. So I think giving PE time, having PE professionals teaching. The next point I would say is getting PE teachers who are currently teaching PE to reflect on their practice. I've seen a lot of what I would call historical practice. And I'm not talking just India, I'm talking in countries around the world, UK as well, which is not the best. Where children are stationary for a lot of the lesson, where they're not challenged, they're not making progress, they're not engaged. Teachers need to be aware of different strategies, different pedagogical approaches to engage people, who can engage the children more effectively. So I think those are the key points, essentially.
Thank you, Nigel. It was wonderful. But let's get here to the panelists. Dr. Rosa, for your remarks, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Nigel. I think you answered several questions that clarify lots of ideas. But there's one question here that I would just read it because I think it's important and it's obviously related with research. And it says, it is important for monitoring the level of individuals' physical literacy. I am interested to develop an instrument to measure perceptions of individuals' physical literacy towards physical activity based on a local K-12 physical education standard. How do you think to implement self-report questions to measure physical competence? This is from Xiaoxi Dawn.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And I think it's an issue that we get. As you saw there, the focus was on physical competence. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, everyone thinks because it's physical education, we just need to focus on physical competence. And that's not the case. We need to look at the holistic development of the child. Now, I have seen, and whoever's asked that question, if you look on the international research, there are hundreds, probably thousands of different strategies of measuring physical competence for different age groups. But where do they get us? It's like measuring the pig. If we just keep measuring it, what good is it doing us? It doesn't get any fatter. We've actually got to work with it. We've got to feed the pig to get it fatter. Likewise, if we want to improve physical competence, we need to develop strategies that actually increase their confidence, competence, knowledge and understanding, and their motivation as well. Now, teachers are specialists. physical education teachers are specialists. If I asked you to watch someone playing badminton, for example, most PE teachers, if it was, let's say, a grade 5 child who hadn't played badminton a lot, most PE teachers will be able to observe their footwork might not be particularly good. Their judging of the flight of the shuttle might not be particularly good. Their actual arm action for particular shots or their range of shots might be quite limited. Do I need to write all this down, or do I just need to observe it? I would argue a good PE teacher should be able to observe it and then just pick up the most important thing, which in that instance would be, okay, what about judging the flight of the shuttle? Let's give you something else to get you judging so you're moving to the shuttle appropriately first, and then let's move you on. So a lot of assessment is done automatically by the PE teacher. We don't need to mark out that that child can do this at that stage and this stage on a sheet of paper, because all we do is we spend our time assessing. So I think we've got to accept that teachers should know and understand the criteria they're looking for without having to write it all down.
Okay, thank you very much. I leave time for the other panelists.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rosa. Dr. Kluka, please. Kluka, can you hear me?
It looks
Dr.
as though
Kluka, darling?
it looks as though she's frozen.
No, I think it's we could hear, Dr. Kluka, please. Can you hear me? Maybe in the meantime, Dr. Amit Malik, for your views, please. You go to.
Thank you, Nigel. And I think it was very engaging discussion to bring forth those points. I particularly like the philosophy is very, very important. If the goal is clear of the physical education, then the curriculum pedagogy will fall together with the assessment.
Yeah.
But the philosophy is not in place, and curriculum is something else, pedagogy else, and I'm doing something else in the assessment. Then these are disjointed efforts. So probably there's a question in the chat box as well, that in the system, education system like India, which is quite teacher centric, and when even these self-reporting or these self-reflection from the children's side, even we have found to be quite a tough challenge. One is because the students are not asked this kind of things in the education system. They just told you are given that much marks in maths or maths in science.
Yeah.
And also the number of students is in the government school where we work with is quite huge. So what would be solution for the teachers to start this practice of building on the self-reflection as an assessment?
Yeah, and this is why I put on a number of different ways of reflecting. The disposition one to me is the most simple. There are 5 statements there, just put across where you feel, if that's more like you or less like you. At the end of your next period of reflection, put another cross. If it's at the same place, why haven't you moved forward? If it's moved a bit, that's great. Why has that happened? If you've actually gone backwards, why has that happened? So a very, very simple reflection is what most schools need. I think that's important. The other couple of points there, I think you picked up on the start, which I will pick up on. In order to change things, we've got to change the policymakers, but we've also got to change the work that the universities do with the teachers they're training as well as the teachers who are actually in service. So we've got to get them thinking differently in the universities as they're training, and we've got to get the policymakers thinking differently at the same time. Sorry, I just thought of that as you were talking.
And Nigel, for this, is there any age group where you found it is easier to do? So did you find the primary as well as the middles, all children to do self-reflection very easily? Or the observation was more useful in primary level?
No, I think right the way through, as long as the language and the way in which it's used is very simple. Again, a lot of teaching comes back to simplicity. If at the end of a class of young children, you say to them, if you feel you've made progress, stand here. If you feel you're more confident, stand there. You know, it's simple, but that's a reflection. That's an assessment of what's gone on. If you don't understand something, just stand there and put your hand up. But then as the children grow up and develop, they start to understand the terminology and the language that's used in the statements. And certainly the work I've done with the heritage schools, the way those children now understand those statements and actually reflect back on those is fantastic. The language they're using in response is incredible. So it just needs to be at the right level according to the children that you're dealing with, just as your teaching needs to.
Sure.
Thank you, Dr. Amit Malik.
Thank you,
Dr.
Shamim.
Kluka, darling Kluka, waiting for your remarks, please.
Nigel, that was a very, very informative, but and direct way in which to pose the environment that the teacher needs to provide. How difficult was it for those who are now going to assist in some way, whether they're injured or they're specially selected or however it goes? How difficult was that for the students to take ownership of leadership kinds of things?
Again, I can refer to work I've done as well as the work I've seen. And when you reflect on individuals and what you want to do, one of the aims when I was teaching is I wanted individuals to be more confident leaders and more confident working with people. And I had a particular example of a young man who was 13. He was an international swimmer. So he was swimming in the morning, in the evening, but he was also in my PE class for swimming. So what do I do with him? This is a top swimmer. He's competing at the highest level. In that class, I've got a few non-swimmers, a number of okay swimmers and some good swimmers. How do I work with this young man? Do I give him the same thing? Well, actually, that young man wasn't overly confident from a social point of view. He wasn't a natural leader. So I made him my coach. So he became my assistant coach. I gave him a group of children to work with, and then he did. And he developed his confidence because the children, his peers looked up to him because they knew he was a good swimmer. He developed his communication, his social skills, and he was 10 foot tall. By the end of that module, he was a changed young man. I've also got modules. I'm sure you've heard of sport education and the side and top work of using seasons and teams. And I had a particularly naughty boy who was given to my group, and I had the better group at the time. And this lad thought he was a bit of a toughie. However, at that time I was using a sport education where the children have to teach each other. So they have to learn those skills. And when you're teaching your peers, you want them to behave. So he sussed out quickly, if I listen to them and do as I'm told, when it's my turn to lead, they'll listen to me. So I'll be happier about that. Behavior change. I think if leadership and teamwork are part of your philosophy and social development, which it certainly for me it is, you'll use that as part of your teaching anyway. Therefore, it's a natural progression that anyone who is stood at the side, for whatever reason, becomes part of your class and you give them different roles. And again, this is where I think teachers need to be aware of the different strategies they can use so that they can engage everyone within the class.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank
Okay.
you, Dr. Darling. Dr. Ikshoso?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Usha. It was a wonderful session, and in fact, very clearly explained what exactly physical literacy is onto, and it's how the participant or anyone to become physically literate, what should be the strategy. And Mr. Nigel has very clearly mentioned about certain important factors to be considered in physical literacy, whereas he has mentioned that she should not be compared, and it is my progress and my peers' progress. And also the most important about components of physical, affective, and cognitive, thereby becoming holistic. He has also mentioned that he differed about the physical fitness terminology, where it merely means statistics. So, and what would be, and also that the philosophy of simple systems and understanding by child, parents, and teachers. So that is some of the important, parts of his today's session, which give clear understanding about physical literacy. What I would like to pick upon is that if physical education is looking upon the making everyone physically educated as a part of education, this can be achieved only through physical literacy. Unless you are physically literate, you cannot be educated. The same terminology in education too. Literacy is the fundamental, the basic towards education, and education maybe towards excellence. So what is the need now is that if you are looking for a strengthening physical education and community coaching, so the physical literacy should be broad-based, that we aspire that every child should be physically literate. And if it is so, and it should not be compared with any yardsticks, have some criterion wherein every child should know his progress. His progress can be known when he knows where he stands, and where and how he progress will be based on some quantifiable, tangible statistics. Without that, I don't know whether he can come to know. Maybe a thought process may be there that I am getting well, or I am getting better, or I am looking. But if it is to be quantifiable, we need to have some data, some statistics. If according to Mr. Nigel, that it is my progress and my peers' progress. So if peers' progress also, how do we realize the peers' progress without any statistics, or merely by looking or comparing? Can we visualize the progress of the peers? And physical fitness, though we don't have, it's like that, at a point of time when we are into literacy, we need not to be too focused on the physical fitness, but physical fitness cannot be undermined too when it comes to a later stage. When he advances, if he goes, into a later stages, that also has its value, but it should not be overemphasized at the initial stage. So my question, or rather, what I would like to get some remarks is that how physical literacy can become the foundation of towards physical, to make a physical education more strengthened, and community coaching, where you aspire to be every child to be physically educated too, and that too, how can the child visualize his progress and his peers' progress without having any statistics or data? Can we establish some criterion to do so? That is what I would like to get some inputs from Mr. Dr. Neil. Thank you so much.
Okay. I mean, I think there was quite a lot within that. So I'm going to try and pick up a few bits one at a time. Just a reminder, you cannot be physically literate. I know we talked about this. We talked about this yesterday. Physical literacy is a journey. Physical literacy is your disposition. So at the moment, if I was to look at the 7 panelists, in front of us, how many of us are determined today to engage in physical activity? I know I'm going off at the end of this and I'm going playing golf. I know I was out riding my bike yesterday and running the day before. I know about my physical literacy. I'm aware of that, I'm confident, that I'm competent, I've got knowledge, understanding, and so on. I know that, and that is important to me. Doesn't matter what my wife does, what my father does, what my sons and daughters do, that's their physical literacy. That's their disposition, it's their behavior, it's their decision whether they engage or not. So our physical literacy engagement is our own journey, and it will change throughout life. There are times when I've had too much to do and I've not been able to engage. So I accept that and I know that. What we need to do as physical education teachers is try and get everyone, particularly the young people, to be in a position where they want to engage as often as they can do. So that's the first thing. The second thing, having statistics is okay. And if you noticed the chart I did for the school, the matrix I did for the school that had 10 levels and 6 columns. When we first did that, we had no numbers associated to it. Then the school said, can we have some numbers? So I put numbers up. And when I said to the teachers, what is the most important thing? They said the statements. The qualitative statement is what the reflection is on. It doesn't matter whether it's an A, a B, a 1, a 99, that doesn't matter. The statement about their physical competence, about their health and fitness, about their social development or whatever is the important thing. So having statements that are progressive, developmental, in relation to the physical, affective, cognitive is a way forward. If we want to put figures on it, if we want to put numbers on it, we can do it. But essentially, it's not important because it's the individual it's important to. Just because we as a group of 7 here came out at an average 7, what does that matter? Usha might have been a 10 on that scale. Rosa might have been a 5. Amit might have been a 7. So what? As a group, we come out as an average of a 7. Who's that important to? No one. Because Rosa needs to know I'm a 7. I'm at this level. I want to try and get to the next level. Usha's at the highest level, but she still wants to try different activities or maintain that. It's important to them. So let's not get carried away with statistics and the need to measure everything, but let's have some steps that are progressive, developmental, but are criteria based. I think that's probably about it for that.
Yeah.
Shilpa?
Yeah. Thank you. So what Nigel would like to that it should be engagement of everyone. Like he got it that after this is going to golf, or maybe it's some sports where everyone is involved, and it also that it should be something journey of everyone.
Yeah.
Journey by each and every participant.
Absolutely.
So that is so. He also stated that it should be progressive and developmental.
Yeah.
So how can we, is it progressive and development merely an assumption of once, or it is based on some science or any other factors? Like he has mentioned that Madam Darlene or 7 or 5, these are digital. So how can we put someone on a digital platform without having been assessed or without being rated?
That broke up
And
a little
now
bit there.
secondary also,
I don't know whether anyone can repeat what he said. It just broke up for me a bit.
The question raised was, how do we assess? Because right now you gave an example of us, like you said, we stand at fifth level. So how did you decide that we came to this particular level? That is through an assessment. That's what he said. Only then you can know the progression.
or
So
it's-
progression is based on some assessment criteria. That's
Yeah,
what,
so you've got, so the criteria is there. So we've got the criteria related to the physical, the affective and cognitive, or related to motivation, knowledge, and etc. And you've got your core tasks as PE teachers. So your core tasks allow you to observe, allow the children to reflect, and between you, you can then look at the different statements that are progressive, developmental, and find a best fit for that particular activity or that particular time. We're then looking at the progress in relation to that, and you've got the challenges that are above for the next level.
okay, see, my contention of having this, matter raised is to have a link made between physical education and literacy. So if we are targeting or focusing on literacy, physical literacy to be achieved to the 10%, the entire youth of the world or the country, then how can we go ahead with that without any statistics or assessment? That is what an issue which is confounding. Merely by subjective rating, even if you want to give subjective rating, we should have a questionnaire to be, to be distributed, and the feedback to be got to get it assessed about what is their level of accomplishment. Like you told that it is your own journey and your progress happens every day. So can we have any other measure? How can we measure about their own assessment and their own progress without even getting a feedback? And this how this feedback
Okay,
and put into
yeah, I think you've
when
just
you are
broken.
looking into the masses, to the principle of theory, that's okay.
Yeah, you broke up again, but I think again, I think I've got the gist of it. You're looking for statistics, and that's fine. As I've said before, we can put numbers to them. If that's what people want to do, we can just allocate numbers. And in fact, the heritage schools, the grade 9 to 12 one, we had to modify and allocate a weighting to certain aspects because the government changed the criteria and they wanted a score out of 100. So we used the same criteria and we gave them a mark out of 100. Okay, so it can be done, but I have to ask you, is that important?
Yeah, in fact, if you want to go on a drive, suppose my question is that if we want to go for a literacy drive, physical literacy drive, suppose we would like Dr. Amit Malik and Mr. Punita Gopichand to take on a physical drive for the country in India and make it aspire every Indian child to become physically literate. We should put forth before them something tangible that look, you come up to this or you do this in accordance to the literacy criterion, you become a physically literate, or you can get acknowledged, or you get rated as a physically literate person. Like in case of National Literacy Drive, we could you make that reading and writing of alphabets, maybe in any language. If you can learn all the alphabets in a language and start creating comprehensive, read and write, maybe
yeah,
a certain
I get your
paragraph.
point.
Then
And
so that became the literacy.
Yeah, I get your point, and I'm sure we'll continue to work with Elms and Gopichan and others to find something that perhaps works for India, because every country will be different. But how one country or one organization judges literacy is different to another country and another organization. So it's quite a challenging thing to do that. But certainly, I think what we'll take from this is that's a challenge for us to look at.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. That makes things clear. Thank you, sir.
thank you, Kishore sir. Professor Nigel, I think it was so wonderful having you for this session. It was a real learning because now what we lack is the lessons, and it's time for a change in the Indian PE community. You have made that clear here. And it's time that we need to change and bring in this. And with the new education policy, I'm sure things have done. And I think LNCP Trivandrum will take the initiative of bring about a change. How we deal. The most important aspect is how you deal with the student makes a vast difference. Like
Yeah.
I think if our teachers like it, it's very different. But I'm sure the PE teachers are going to go in. But we need a policy change. The principals, I think they're all the head of the institutions. If they get together to decide, and if the parents come together and they say it's required, I'm sure this would come in. So limiting it to the heritage school, I think can bring it, we can slowly start spreading it across. So
Absolutely.
I know you have an assignment at 6:50, but it's been wonderful. You kept your time. So on behalf of the Ministry of Youth Affairs and Sports, Government of India, Hello India, a big thank you to Nigel. It was a wonderful presentation, not presentation, I can say. It was a wonderful learning experience, even for me too, because I think we were slightly outdated, but slowly we are ready for a change. And I think age is not a criteria at all. There's a slight problem with my. Come here. So I'd like to thank Nigel. I'm sorry, there's a slight connectivity issue. Yeah. Thank you so much, Nigel. Once again, I need to thank Professor Margaret Whitehead, and especially I need to tell the entire PE community. It was just a notice of one day, and Nigel said, yes, I'm prepared for the session. Thank you so much. You made a wonderful change, and you just asked in a short time. Thank you so much once again on behalf of everybody present here, and it's namaste and hats off to you.
Thank
So
you.
we are with open
Namaste
palms.
to
We
you.
want you. We want
Yeah.
your inputs. We look forward to further support, and you're going to help us in strengthening the PE, in due course, the PL, SIL in CP2,
Yeah.
and for our teaching community. Thank you so much.
And can I thank
Thank
the
you.
panel once again, because I really like their questions, and obviously all the PE teachers who've listened in. Much appreciated.
But thank you.
Yeah.
I'd like to thank.
I hope I have not posed more of those questions, and it was getting too than the usual mode.
Thank you, Kishore sir. I think the voice was breaking.
Normal.
I just missed that. Yeah.
Kishore sir, the voice is breaking. We can't hear.